Accidents happen. A dropped vase, a spilled cup of wine, a misplaced foot. But when a king is accidentally set on fire, you have to wonder, was it really an accident? The death of Charles II of Navarre is shrouded in mystery. He was a man of ambition, cunning, and perhaps a touch of recklessness. His demise was swift, unexpected, and undeniably dramatic. Join me as we delve into the evidence, sift through the historical accounts, and try to uncover the truth behind the king who met a fiery fate. Chapter 1: Early Life and Inheritance. The story of Charles II of Navarre begins in 1332, a pivotal moment in European history. The continent was simmering with tensions that would soon erupt into the devastating 100 Years' War between France and England. But amidst this backdrop of political unrest, a child was born in Évreux, France, whose life would become a fascinating, if often perplexing, chapter in medieval history. This child was Charles II, and his parentage was the key to understanding the complex tapestry of his life. His father, Count Philip of Évreux, was a member of the French nobility, deeply enmeshed in the intricate web of French courtly politics. His mother, Joan II, reigned as Queen of Navarre, a small but strategically vital kingdom nestled between the powerful realms of France and Castile. She's often drawn in illuminated manuscripts as a pious woman performing charity or praying. This dual heritage wasn't just some random family tree fact. It was Charles's destiny. He was heir to two distinct realms, two separate spheres of influence, each with its own unique set of challenges and opportunities. The County of Évreux, located within the borders of France, tied him to the French crown and its often turbulent politics. The medieval illuminated manuscripts show how Philip, Charles's father, pays homage to his liege, the King of France. But the Kingdom of Navarre offered him an independent throne, a chance to forge his own path, albeit one fraught with geopolitical pressures. You see, Navarre was a crucial buffer state, constantly caught between the ambitions of its larger, more powerful neighbors. Its location made it a prize, and Charles found himself at the center of this political tug-of-war from a very young age. Charles's early life was all about inheritance. In 1343, at just 11 years old, his father died, making him Count of Évreux. Can you imagine the pressure? Suddenly, this kid was responsible for governing a whole territory, navigating feudal obligations and courtly intrigue. Then just 6 years later, in 1349, fate dealt another blow. Queen Joan's death elevated Charles to the throne of Navarre. Now, this young man found himself ruling not one, but two distinct realms. This dual inheritance wasn't just about titles and lands. It placed Charles in a precarious position, constantly balancing his loyalty to the French crown with the pursuit of his own ambitions in Navarre. He was both a prince of France and a king in his own right, a figure caught between two powerful forces. This delicate balancing act, this constant negotiation between competing interests, would become the defining characteristic of his reign. The seeds of his later reputation, Charles the Bad, were sown in these very formative years. A little ironic aside here, this illuminated manuscript depicts Charles the Bad paying homage to his liege John the Good of France. Chapter 2: A king torn between loyalties. One of Charles's first moves as king was to solidify his ties with France. In 1352, he married Joan of Valois, the daughter of King John II of France. This marriage was intended to cement his relationship with the French monarchy, a strategic alliance designed to protect his interests and ensure stability. But here's where things get interesting. Charles, despite his marriage, felt increasingly alienated by the French crown. He saw his claims to important territories, such as those in Normandy, dismissed in favor of royal favorites like Charles de la Cerda, the Constable of France. His aspirations for greater autonomy and recognition within the French court were repeatedly thwarted, deepening his resentment. The French king, John II, viewed him with suspicion, especially as Charles began forging independent diplomatic ties. So Charles was confronted with a question: what is he to do? But before we get into that, let me ask you a question. Have you liked the video and subscribed to my channel yet? If not, now's the perfect time. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on any of my upcoming videos. In 1354, Charles's supporters assassinated Charles de la Cerda. It was a clear signal that Charles was not afraid to challenge the king's authority, a demonstration of his volatile nature and his willingness to use violence to achieve his goals. King John's response was swift and decisive. In 1356, he imprisoned Charles, a move designed to assert his dominance and quell the rebellious king. But Charles was not one to be easily subdued. With the aid of his allies in the French nobility, many of whom were opposed to John II, Charles orchestrated a daring escape during a period of heightened instability. The king's own capture by the English at Poitiers in 1356 further weakened royal authority, creating the perfect opportunity for Charles to flee. His escape further inflamed the already tense situation, marking a turning point that pushed him further down a path of defiance and political maneuvering. Chapter 3: The 100 Years' War and Shifting Alliances. The backdrop to all of this was the ongoing 100 Years' War. The conflict between England and France created a chaotic landscape, a perfect breeding ground for political opportunism. Charles, with his complex loyalties and his grievances against the French crown, saw an opportunity to exploit the situation. He began playing a dangerous game, shifting his alliances between England and France, always seeking to maximize his own power and territory. This included exploiting the chaos of the Jacquerie, a massive peasant revolt that erupted in France in 1358. Initially, Charles supported the revolt, seeing it as a way to weaken the French crown. But when the tide turned against the rebels, he ruthlessly switched sides and helped crush the revolt, as seen in this illuminated manuscript. This period of shifting allegiances and political intrigue would earn him the moniker Charles the Bad, a testament to his reputation as a treacherous and unreliable ruler. Charles II saw his chance. He threw his support behind the English cause, using his strategic position and political cunning to gain more power in Normandy, a region crucial for controlling northern France. Remember this being a pain point for which he assassinated Charles de la Cerda? The Treaty of Bretigny in 1360 brought a temporary pause to the fighting. This treaty, signed between England and France, had major implications for Charles. It temporarily ceded significant French territories to England, including exactly those Norman lands Charles had been vying for. While this initially seemed like a win for Charles, Charles's luck couldn't hold out forever. King John II of France died, which reignited the conflict. In 1364, disaster struck at the Battle of Cocherel. His opponent was Bertrand du Guesclin, the man with the black eagle coat of arms in the illuminated manuscripts, a brilliant military leader who would become a key figure in the French resurgence during the 100 Years' War. Du Guesclin's decisive victory over Charles at Cocherel not only shattered Charles's ambitions in Normandy, but also marked a turning point in the larger conflict. Charles's influence began to wane as King Charles V of France, a shrewd and determined ruler, consolidated his power and systemically pushed back against English and Navarrese control. Charles II found himself increasingly isolated, his carefully constructed web of alliances unraveling before his eyes. But even with his influence in France declining, Charles wasn't one to back down. He soon found another opportunity to flex his political muscles, this time in the Castilian Civil War of 1366 to 1369. True to form, he initially supported Peter of Castile, but later switched sides back to Henry of Trastamara, always seeking to benefit from the conflict, no matter how messy. By the way, take a look who else was involved in the Civil War: Du Guesclin. Chapter 4: Later Reign and Death. As Charles II entered the later years of his reign, the consequences of his earlier actions really started to catch up with him. His enemies were numerous and his allies were few. In 1378, Charles faced a serious accusation, plotting to poison King Charles V of France. This accusation, whether true or fabricated, came at a time of heightened tensions between Charles and the French crown. Charles V had been systemically dismantling Charles II's power base in France, and his poisoning plot, if real, could have been a desperate attempt by Charles II to regain control. Regardless of its veracity, the accusation further damaged Charles's reputation and alienated him from the French court. Whether the accusation was true or not is still debated by historians, but the consequences were significant. Charles lost some of his lands in France, a blow to his power and prestige. Despite these setbacks, Charles continued to rule Navarre. He focused on consolidating his power within his kingdom, seeking to strengthen his position and secure his legacy. However, his later years were marked by a growing sense of isolation and a decline in his political influence. Then, in 1387, tragedy struck. Charles II died in Pamplona, Navarre, under bizarre and unexpected circumstances. The exact cause of his death is still debated, but the most common account is that he was accidentally set on fire. According to this version of events, Charles was wrapped in bandages and soaked in brandy as a treatment for some ailment. One evening, a servant attending to him accidentally ignited the bandages with a candle, setting the king ablaze. Despite efforts to save him, Charles succumbed to his injuries. It was an ironic fate for a man who had spent his life igniting conflicts and fanning the flames of political turmoil, only to be consumed by fire in the end. Historians have long debated the circumstances of Charles II's death. While the general consensus holds that he perished due to burns, the exact details remain uncertain. Some argue that the widely accepted account, featuring a servant accidentally setting fire to his brandy-soaked bandages, is an embellished narrative, possibly exaggerated over time to mock his reputation as Charles the Bad. Contemporary sources, like Jean Froissart, provide only brief mentions of his demise, leaving room for, let's say, later interpretations. Others suggest that political enemies spread the story to turn his tragic end into a cautionary tale of recklessness and excess. Charles II left behind a complex legacy, a mix of cunning, ruthlessness, and ultimately vulnerability. But was he truly bad or simply a product of his time? A king forced to make difficult choices in a world of shifting alliances and ruthless power struggles. Regardless of interpretation, Charles II remains a fascinating and enigmatic figure, a king whose life and death continue to spark debate and intrigue centuries later. What do you think about Charles II's mysterious end? Leave a comment with your thoughts or share this tale with fellow history enthusiasts. That's it for today. Check out my sources below, like and subscribe. See you in the next one.